is perception? Perception is how we perceive or how we become consciously aware with everything we look at, listen to, smell, taste, and feel. Perception varies from person to person. It could be influenced by one's knowledge, culture, beliefs, past experiences, predispositions, expectations, abilities, and more. Perception is not just a psychological phenomenon. In fact, it's also physical and physiological. How do we perceive things? Perception, which has many types, also has many processes that occur differently depending on the type of sensory modality. Visual or sight, auditory or sound, olfactory or smell, gustatory or taste, and touch. There's also the proprioception, wherein it is the sense of self-movement and body positions. However, in a general sense, the perceptual process occurs more or less like this. First is physical. Sensation, as with the sensory modalities mentioned a while ago, happens because of our physical abilities. Our bodies have numerous and various sense receptors that receive these signals, called stimuli, either internal or external, conscious or unconscious. Stimuli are everywhere, and every day we are exposed to tons of it. Second is physiological. When we start to acknowledge some of these stimuli, do they become attended ones, as if filtering all those tons into a few chosen ones. It is important to remember that seeing is not the same as looking at something, nor is hearing the same as listening, and touching as with feeling. After this comes transduction. Transduction simply means the conversion of these signals into electrical ones, so they could travel to and be processed by our brain. Third is psychological, and is also where perception finally takes place. When our brains process these signals comes our ability to perceive and interpret them. Again, perception varies from each person to another. It's much like personalizing these signals. That's why everyone has, indeed, their own point of view. This is then followed by recognition. Because of our individual differences, the way we recognize what we just perceived is completely subject to ourselves. Once we gain recognition, the process goes back to being physiological, as these newly interpreted signals travel to wherever they're needed in our bodies. And once they arrive, our bodies perform certain actions appropriate to these interpretations, thus going back into a physical phenomenon. Also note that because of our differences, not everyone could perceive closely as with this process, especially when the difference lies on our physical and cognitive abilities. The following are examples of perceptual deficits. Agnosia, or the inability to recognize objects, whether through visual, auditory, or tactile. Prosopagnosia, or the impairment in facial recognition. Ataxia, which is characterized by uncoordinated movements. Aphantasia, or the inability to visualize things with the mind. And schizophrenia, which is characterized by the distortions in cognition, including perception. Why do we perceive things? To be alive means to interact with one's environment, and we could only do this effectively with perception. These interactions could also aid with our survival and longevity. And because it does vary from person to person, perception signifies one's uniqueness. Ultimately, It is through perception that we can learn to appreciate and best experience not only ourselves, but more importantly, the world we live in.